right, I'm now here with former Imagineer Jim Shull. You may remember from our Golden Jamboree event, we talked about many of the projects he worked on at Walt Disney World, but now we're going to focus, obviously, with the 30th anniversary on Euro Disneyland, Disneyland Paris. Jim, how are you?
Hey, Tom, I'm great. Thank you for asking me on the program. It's great to be back.
Thank you for coming back. We appreciate it. So, you have a really interesting story as to how you got involved with Disneyland Paris in the first place. And so I want to hear this amazing tale.
Well, there's always a lot of serendipity at WDI. And, my story is I was actually not working on Euro Disneyland. I was way over there on the other side of the country, other side of the world, in fact, working on Disneyland in Anaheim. And I was working on Mickey's Toontown. Now, as you know, Mickey's Toontown had a junior coaster called Gadget Go Coaster. And it just so happens that coaster was being built over in Europe at Vekoma, which is in Flowdrop. Well, I had to go back and forth. And back in those days, back in the dawn of time with the dinosaurs 30 years ago, before the internet, before computers, before high-speed rail, before everything, basically as an Imagineer, they handed you a ticket because they were back in those days, there was a little room down in 1401 where they'd actually issue you an airline ticket. So I'd take my ticket and I head for the airport, and I get on the plane and I go over to Europe for a couple of weeks. And then I get a phone call from my functional manager in Glendale saying, it just so happens we found out that you're in Europe for a while, and we just so happen to have this little thing that's about to open, but could use some help because it's all hands on deck. And that thing, of course, was Euro Disneyland.
Little thing.
So I'm new at the company, relatively speaking, and I want to make a good impression. So I say what anyone says. Yes, of course. And I ended up there then for weeks over in Mandeville, basically doing whatever they told me to do. There was one project I did where, and I mean, when we say anything, I mean anything. For example, I went and one morning they said, the walls outside of the Pirates of the Caribbean, all those exterior queue walls, they need some paint. And so, remember, this is in the fall, winter, still cold. And so we had plastic over the walls. We had heaters, space heaters to blow hot gas to warm us up, mostly to keep the paints warm, because they figured, Imagineers can put on more clothes. Paints don't like the cold, so keep the paints warm. And so I painted the walls. I mean, you can see right here in this photograph some of that work that I did with some others. And as an art director, I was in charge of both doing the work and then being in charge of, anyone they'd get, the local hires from Germany, Netherlands, French, of course, Italians, and painted walls. And then also in this other photograph, the other thing, among other things I did, was I became a gardener. So if you look around today, all around the treehouse at Swiss Family on Adventure Isle, there's a lot of old growth plant material. Well, before there was old growth plants, there was a lot of old dirt, and that all needed to be planted. So again, I showed up one day and I said, okay, I'm done with the wall painting. What do you have for me now? And they said, well, today you're a gardener. So here's your shovel, Jim, and there's some guys who really would like your help on, you go plant something and then point at that and they'll copy you. Because again, remember, I'm from California. My Dutch is, I can't speak Dutch. Italian, I can barely speak English as an American. So I'm working by mime mostly. And I planted all around Swiss Family. So those are just two of the examples of all hands on deck. And I had two hands, so I was on deck.
Yeah. Do you remember around what time you were there working on all this stuff?
Well, we opened, it was about a year before opening, starting a year before opening. Because that was concurrent with every time I'd go over to work on the Go Coaster at Vekoma. And remember, Flowdrop, driving from Flowdrop to the side of Mandeville, I could make it in about 4 hours.
Okay.
So I had no excuse. And so I ended up going down there, and it's basically about a year. Anytime I was there, I'd be on my way as a side trip going to Mandeville. But the nice thing is, of course, you could fly home from De Gaulle. So I saved myself one flight connection.
There you go. See the positive in the situation. I mean, but also
Gotta
in
think positive,
retrospect, it's
imagine.
got to be pretty cool. Like not there haven't been that many. It's only been 12 Disney parks ever built, right? And to be there on the ground while they're building at that point the most ambitious one, that's got to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, it was, and it was unique. I mean, it was a great opportunity both to learn and to experience a growth. Coming to Disney, I never thought during my career there that I would see us going from 4 parks to 12 parks. I mean, there was a point where during the end of the Disney decade, within, I think it was about 4 years, there were 4 parks that had opened. Of course, there was Tokyo Disney Sea among them, Animal Kingdom, DCA in California, and the second gate in Paris.
So while you were painting walls and planting flowers and all of those things, you would actually get to work on several attractions for Euro Disneyland or Disneyland Paris. How did that come about?
Well, again, to go back to that old rule of serendipity, I finally did finish Mickey's Toontown. It's finally open. And when you're working on a project, that really becomes the thing you're thinking and working and focused on. So, to paraphrase, I finish on a Friday and I come into the office on a Monday not knowing what I'm going to do. And not really worried, but by the time I got my coffee and sat at my desk, I got a knock on the door, and Tony Baxter, a name familiar to us all, found out, hey, since you're available, we're going to get a little group of people together. And since you've been in Europe now, you know a little bit about Euro Disneyland. And so we're going to brainstorm things, because originally the plan was that Euro Disneyland would expand the way a lot of parks do. It expands on a planned basis. So, as it's been known forever now, there was going to be a mermaid ride and a Beauty and the Beast show. And that was the plan. And, there's artwork out. Yeah. There's announcements out. It's common knowledge, public knowledge. But that wasn't the plan that was implemented. So Tony explained to us in the room, hey, there's going to be the Additional Capacity Program, or ACP for short. And it basically was, given the success of Euro Disneyland, or not so much on the financial side, but definitely on the guest satisfaction side, they needed more ride shows and attractions for guests to do. And so the strategy was to deliver the Additional Capacity Program, and that was going to consist of 10 new ride shows and attractions, 11 if you add in Space Mountain, which was then, of course, Discovery Mountain. And of those, I worked on 5 of them. 1 did not get built because it sacrificed its life for another project on the list of ACP that we can talk about later. But I did those and started them in Glendale. Showed the ideas to Tony and management and Marty Sklar, and basically ran up and down the hallways with my hair on fire, trying to show people how wonderful these would be if they only gave me some money. And they said, actually, like they always do, surprisingly, they say, yeah, we could see you do this. And so I found myself as the creative director for new projects at Additional Capacity Program, and I started them in Glendale and eventually followed them over into Paris, over to Birmingham, England, where I lived for a while, Damandavli, where I returned to live, went and then spent a lot of time with ride and show vendors to deliver all of my responsible projects.
So you have to, so it's such a weird thing, because again, people hear like there was financial trouble right from the beginning, but at the same point, they're like, people need more stuff to do in the park. So I imagine when you're coming up with these ideas, was there a constraint of I assume the budget was not as robust as some of the opening day stuff. Are these intended to be smaller things in general, just things that utilize infrastructure that exists, or?
I can only speak from my experience, and that was not the first project I worked on. I worked on a number of projects after this. So I look at my over 3 decades plus experience, and I'd say no. Actually, ACP was well funded. I mean, Tony leading the team really had a strategy about it. So certain projects got more money, certain projects got less money, certain projects became projects because they required less capital. I mean, for example, the old Chaparral Theater in Frontierland. You know, I remember Dave Burkhart walking by his office over in Chastain, where the Disneyland Paris or Euro Disneyland team was founded and where they were located and headquartered. And I saw him there at his drawing table. And I mean, this guy is a show producer, you know, and he's drawing something. And I went and say, "Hey, Dave, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm drawing a theater." Okay, fantastic. The idea being a theater where WDI is not responsible for, you know, supplying the entertainment, is going to cost a whole lot less than Indiana Jones and the Temple of Peril or the 20K Nautilus. But they both will provide capacity and things for people to do. So strategically, it's taking the money that we had, and then strategically and wisely applying it over all of these projects. So at the end of the day, you did two things. You delivered fantastic content, you met schedule, and then you stayed on budget. You wanted to do that perfect trifecta of those three items.
So what ends up? We want to break this down project by project. Where do you want to start?
Well, you know, I can do two things. There's obviously projects I know more about because they were my projects, and then there are projects that I know about because I was part of the overall team. But let's talk about, kind of go down the list. And the viewers can't see, but I have a cheat sheet over here. And we can go down the list.
It's been 30 years. I think you're allowed to have a cheat sheet. It's a long.
I know. You know, the weird thing, Tom, about being 3 decades is, you know, when I got there, I mean, John Hench actually told me this, and Clyde as well, Clyde Coates. He said, you know you've been here a long time when they call you to either rehab, revise, or remove the project you built. And I can tell you that there are projects that I built that I have lived long enough to see them being removed and revised and rebuilt.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you. Doesn't make me feel old. It just makes me feel very, very busy. Hey, so starting at the top of the list, let's pick the first one. And there are official names, and I'm not going to pretend to speak French. My French did not improve over the decades. But there was the castle, which is the gem, in my opinion, of all the castles in any of the Disney castle parks.
Yeah.
But what a lot of people fail to remember or don't know is it didn't open with a walkthrough. You walked in up the ramp. Maybe if you went left and then down a staircase, you'd see the dragon underneath the castle. But you had a whole upper second floor that was not active. And so the first idea was, and it wasn't my project, so I'm going to, you know, speak as well as I know, more as a fan of the project than as somebody who drove the project. But they created a castle walkthrough telling the story of Sleeping Beauty. So you had beautifully illuminated books, you had stained glass, you had the music, and they took the facility that's there and leveraged it. And it was already halfway to gorgeous with the stone trees that were beautifully hand carved. But what it didn't have is access for the guests, and it didn't tell a story. And so now it didn't have a lot of capacity with this revision and addition, but it had some, and also, I would argue, it filled scratched the itch for guests to say, well, I've seen the dragon, I see the castle. What's the story? What's the story of this character? And adding the castle walkthrough to Fantasyland did that. It, you know, fulfilled or paid off the promise to the guests of here's the castle and here's the story.
Yeah, it's such a small thing, but honestly, I think about my trips to Paris, the castle walkthrough is such a highlight. Just because it's an opportunity to see up close that the stained glass, which is gorgeous, where they had an artisan come out of retirement who had done, you know, all these real cathedrals and all this sort of solemn art his whole life, and he was so happy to do something happy for once in his career. And then the tapestries and even just the statues of Diablo the Raven and Aurora and Philip, and it's just such a pleasant space. It's really, it feels very special.
And I would argue also, Tom, there's a guest satisfier because you're not asking the guest to stand in an hour line to go on do something. If you walk into the castle and you see the entry and you see a sign saying go up those stairs and go have see an attraction, you can do that. There's no real more commitment by that, and so you get into a guest satisfaction mode of value versus delivery. You know, for very little, you invest very little of your time, and then in return you get a really good experience. So I would argue it's a real win-win there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the castle walkthrough at Disneyland, but obviously they had a lot of spatial constraints. And in Paris, it's a very big park. And so I love the fact that there is room to sort of mill about. Like you can stand off to the side if you want other people to go by and move on to the next thing. There's plenty of room for you to stand there and really admire and enjoy each piece. It's like you said, it's just a really pleasant experience.
Yeah, in this photograph, we can see we're in that second floor. In the bottom floor, which is the guest traveling floor from the hub out to the land proper, you see all these stone columns as if they were roots or pedestals on which the stone trees on the second floor are mounted. So as you said, happy, because the stone on the ground floor is all gray and moody and dramatic, but on the upper floor, it's all beautifully stone trees, and there are lights embedded in the branches of the trees, and then there are overlooks. So you can just stand there. You could walk up the stairs, stand there for 5-10 minutes, and watch humanity move beneath you. So it's a place that is a place you could chill if you wanted to. It's really one of my favorite places. Whenever I go, I always make a stop at the castle.
Like you said, there's never a line, so you can do it whenever you like.
Never a line. You're right. But please go. We'll go back together. So the next thing on the list, our top 10, is also in that same vein. Switching over there in Frontierland, it was brilliant because they built the fort in front of Frontierland. Who would think? You know, Anaheim had always disappointed me as a child. I'd walk from the main hub and I see what looked like a fort.
Yeah. And
once you're inside, past the gate and the two walls, there's no fort there.
No.
I was like, what happened to the rest of the fort? I'm losing the buildings. There's no back to this fort.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm somebody trying to invade it or break into the fort, I don't have to go in the front door, and I can just walk around the back through Adventureland, and come right on in and take over, play havoc, and maybe go to the art shooting gallery and have a good old time. But in Paris, they had the Legends of the Old West. And I remember that being done. So there was a little bit of land in front of the Legends of the fort, and they created a trail. They had the Indian teepees, and they leveraged those. They put a plaque in front of them. They opened up a staircase to the upper floor of the old fort, and I believe all the figures of famous Western characters and figures and historical figures were done by Dorfman. And so they had an opportunity to leverage, again, a facility that was already there. They had an ability to tell a little bit of Western history, real historic history to the French who love the Old West. And, it was an educational opportunity as opposed to being just purely a fantasy-based opportunity. Because you could go through and guess what? You could actually learn something about the American Old West of the 1880s.
Learning
which
in a
again
theme park.
played, and it played beautifully into one of my favorite scenes. And you can see in this image, when you came out of the fort, you'd be looking at that beautiful vista of the sign that said "Welcome to Thunder Mesa," and in the far distance you'd see Thunder Mountain, pulling you toward, and then there would be the ore car, rails and ore cars, and you'd see steam coming out of the buildings. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
It was a fantastic experience. And again, you probably could never have paid for that fort, but under the ACP rules, you did have the money to pay to modify the fort in order to build this new walkthrough attraction.
So a couple things. Number one, I had no idea until we were getting ready to do this. I did not realize, I had never read that a lot of these walkthroughs were added after the fact to these existing structures. I would have believed that the castle walkthrough and this fort walkthrough were there with the structures when they opened. The addition is so seamless to both of these that I was blown away when you said, oh no, we added that after. That was a thing we came back and did.
You know, I think in due part, that's because the Imagineers who built the original buildings came back to redo the other ones. Like Tom Morris was intimately involved with the castle walkthrough. Well, heck, he designed the castle. No one else knows the nooks and crannies and what's possible and not possible, what the design intent was for the castle more than Tom Morris. You know, Jeff Burke knew his Frontierland better than anyone, so he could step in and, you know, deal with that. And him and Pat Burke could come in and step in, and they weren't trying to invent the wheel. They were actually trying to fulfill and finish a vision that they had when they were first designing. Because as you know, you've heard the stories of you design 10 ideas and you get to build 7 because suddenly, you know, the enemy of time and the enemy of money step in and you don't get to fulfill your vision. So in that way, ACP was that once in a lifetime opportunity to step in and finish the job.
Yeah, I mean, and you're right, every park has that story, right? It's at the beginning of every Disney park. In the world, there are those things that get pushed off to phase 2 that they're like, oh, we'll come back to it. And then they never do, right? Western River Expedition and, you know, in this case, the Little Mermaid Bride and the Beauty and the Beast show. Or, you know, how many parks that always seems to happen? It's like, oh, we'll push it to phase 2. We don't have the time or the money right now. And then circumstances are what they are. And then, you know, you open Pirates of the Caribbean instead. And then the rest of our lives, we stare at that Mark Davis art thinking, why?
Yeah, I mean, really good. What happens, the reality is really good designers are really good designers. And so if you have a design team and they are successful, and you could list any of the successful parks, those teams generally hit the ground and bounce immediately into another project, which unfortunately means they're not available to circle back to finish the job if suddenly time and money and desire occurs to finish the job. So it gets assigned to somebody else. And unfortunately, there's a steep learning curve anytime you hand off to someone else because you have a tribal knowledge, and the team that created Euro Disneyland had spent, well, all the years of construction and years of development, and before that, the years of thinking about it. And when you assign that to someone else, that information, that knowledge is all gone.
Yeah.
I mean, you can talk to somebody, but, you know, the answer is going to be, we'd love to help you, but we're working on something else now.
Yeah. But of course, you know, speaking of Western River, Thunder Mesa did exist, not as Mark intended, but nonetheless, Frontierland at Disneyland Paris, Thunder Mesa. And you do get that, like you said, there's that gorgeous view from up on top of the fort, thanks to the walkthrough, where you stand just over the path and you look out and there's Big Thunder in the distance and the whole town and the Ravenswood Manor. And it's just one of the most beautiful vistas in any Disney park ever built.
I mean, I think I would have to have a heart of stone not to be moved, because going back to Legends of the Old West, one of the great things is there is that point promenade on the second floor of the fort where it opens up and you can see all the way across Thunder Mesa. And that was a view you never had before. You could see it, but only from the ground. But now imagine you're on the second floor of a building. And so you're looking over the tops of all the guest heads and all the props and everything. And so you get a real vista all the way across Rivers of America, River of the Old West, past Thunder Mesa, and even to the arch in the very far back of that land. So that was a view that you suddenly have, and I would say I'd have to have a heart of stone not to be moved by that.
It's crazy because I think in the U.S. parks, I see people tweet about it all the time. They talk about, oh, we never have anything on second levels, and a lot of that is ADA compliance, right? I mean, that's a really big component. I assume in Paris at this point in time that wasn't a concern, and that's why we're able to do so many things on levels?
Well, Tom, I think history has proven that actually back 30 years ago there were disabled people back then even,
Yeah.
and somehow they did get up to the second floor because otherwise every apartment building in Paris would stop on
Yeah.
floor 0. So, somehow people get up there. I mean,
Yeah.
I've told this story, I'll tell it again. As a Californian, I'm always assuming, hey, it's California, it doesn't rain here, it's nice and warm, that's why people live here. And so in Paris, we built all the arcades. You could, from the front gate where you bought your ticket, all the way back to Peter Pan in the far end of Fantasyland, you could remain dry. Why? Because it was designed by Californians. Why? Because Californians don't like to get wet. I mean, anytime you see the rain forecast, go to Anaheim. Because I guarantee you'll have the best day ever.
Yeah.
Great day to photograph, great day for capacity. But we assumed that was going to be the case in Paris. In reality, it never was, because unless it was a tempest where the rain was going sideways, the Parisians would put on their coats, they'd put on their hats, they'd put on their umbrellas, and they'd go out into the park, and they would just enjoy it. So, this is a long-winded, push back on saying, yes, you could have had things on the second floor. That's not a reason. Anyone who's dedicated and clever to find a way to have a second floor can.
Do you think it comes into budget though, right? Because you have to build an elevator in most cases, right? So I think that's why. So what I remember, so a more recent example, Disney Springs. When they were building Disney Springs, they were going to build a lot more of it. There's some of it. They were going to build that abandoned elevated train track, right? And so there became a whole bunch of legal and money concerns. They were concerned about people having cocktails and then going up on a second floor. They were concerned about getting people up and down from this elevated high line. And so, I mean, creatively, I don't believe there's anything an Imagineer can't come up with, a problem they can't solve, right? But there is always time and budget and, in the case of, you worked on Toontown, later on legal concerns that come into play and sort of wreak havoc on a project, right?
Yeah, I mean, sadly, you and I weren't able to hook up when you were in California to do your walkthrough and your wonderful show, streaming live from Toontown.
Yeah.
But, I did Toontown. I know the story, the Chippendale Ball Crawl. And I'm sorry, viewers, I'm digressing, but
they're all right. They're all right with it. They love these. They love these
it's
stories.
Worth the trip. Go get a tea or a bag of popcorn, settle back. Sugar cookie, vanilla sugar cookies are my favorite. But anyway,
now you're really off course.
I know we are, but it's important.
Okay.
So anyway, throughout, Toontown was built really and developed for families with preschoolers. What do? What do preschoolers like? They love ball crawls. Get in a ball pit, play, etc.
Yeah.
We know they exist. They're in McDonald's. Every McDonald's seemed to have a ball crawl.
Yeah.
So we built a ball crawl. And guess what? We found what works for McDonald's doesn't work for Disneyland because of hygiene. Because, what happens if, your toddler, has an accident, a little too happy, a little excited, a little too much caffeine, he had too many, coffees that day. And there's an accident. And so now the acorns, and I can't even begin to tell you how much those acorns cost, because it's one thing to buy a ball, but to do a rotomolded acorn is a lot more than
I
a ball.
assume custom design. They weren't a thing someone had.
No,
like
you can't go in the yellow pages and say, acorns are us. Flip through the pages, find acorns are us, and order a truckload. No, they were designed. I designed them. I've got drawings still of acorns.
That's cool.
Anyway, I really digress. So anyway, the acorns are now spinning. Imagine, if you will, that Junior's had too much caffeine, lost it, and now the acorns are moving. Well, what do? They wick the moisture, so suddenly you pollute the entire ball crawl.
Yeah.
And that is why the ball crawl got closed and stayed closed for not years but decades.
Yeah.
And we wave goodbye to the ball crawl permanently now as they reimagine Mickey's Toontown.
Goodbye to the gray pit.
You buy to the great. So, you buy, you do all that. But again, I think the reality, at least my reality was, I really believe that, and I could have tattooed in the underside of my eyelids, Walt saying it's fun to do the impossible.
Hmm.
And I take that as a personal challenge to say, okay, you're giving me some money and you're giving me some time and you really want something. And I believe you're going to give me money and time to do it. So my job as a designer is to go and do it.
Yeah.
So, I would go and come up with something. So it's not a problem, it's an opportunity. And so if you have a second floor, give me time. I'll figure out how to get you up there.
Yeah, that makes sense. I always believe like it becomes a budget thing, right? And it becomes like, okay, of all the things to cut, it's like, all right, that's the easy thing to cut in some cases. Because I think a lot of times those
Yeah.
second floor things are going to be they're just kind of for vantage point. They're not for necessarily an attraction or for, they're usually just for views.
Again, I don't know how we can do this without going to another sidebar. I personally love a quiet, peaceful place to sit in
Yeah.
a Disney park. And so when I was the creative director for Paradise Pier and DCA 2.0, all underneath the old Orange Stinger, when I did the design to make that the Silly Symphony swings,
Mhm.
I insisted, and I don't follow my sword about a lot of things, but I did on this one, is to put a second floor underneath the swings with shade and benches and put it low to the water to have people go and listen to the water, see other people, have a quiet area so they can have a chill.
Mhm.
And, I thought I like it, so I guess other people will like it. And on my Twitter account, I posted a couple of images once of this, and I couldn't tell you the response I got because people said, "Oh, thank you. A place I can get out of the crowd. I can get away
Yeah.
from the music. I can get away from stress. I can take 5 before I go back in line and ramp up my energy level to go on the next ride."
Mhm.
So I personally value and I believe that having a quiet, peaceful place is really important because otherwise,
Yeah.
why would we call it Disneyland Park?
Mhm.
Why not just call it Disneyland? But it's
Yeah.
called Park. And parks have trees, they have shade, they have benches. So that is my 2 cents
Yeah.
on that subject.
No, I think the two best parks that have ever been built, I think it's Disneyland Paris and it's Tokyo Disney Sea. And I think the two things that they have that connect to this discussion, I think there are a lot of changes in elevation, which I think people really like that ability to look out onto like an area like that view of Thunder Mesa from the walkthrough. And I think they have a lot of just like hangout space. There is a lot of space where you can just relax and enjoy the world that's been created. There are a lot of places along the waterfront in that Frontierland in Paris where you can just take in Big Thunder Mountain and the haunted house across the way and just the town. And it's what makes those two parks special, I think, is the atmosphere. Sometimes more so than
Yeah.
any attraction. It's the ability to have a space to take in and sit and enjoy what's been created.
Yeah, and I think part of it, what you're touching on, is having an opportunity to explore. The
Mhm.
worst thing, if you go to a movie, I saw Morbius the other day, sitting in the theater,
Yeah.
and if I walked in right now and told you everything and spoiled Morbius, you'd go, "Fine, he ruined the greatest movie ever made." It's not. It's not. But the point I'm making is people want to explore in a park. Therefore, when you
Mhm.
have those moments of discovery that you just mentioned,
Mhm.
in Phantom Manor, if you go to Phantom Manor, not the ride, but the ride it's next to the ride is that beautiful old graveyard.
Yeah.
It's not connected on the pathway. You don't have to walk by it unless you do it as a discovery.
Mhm.
And you walk in, and oh, by the way, there are things to read. Tombstones on the hill, tombstones there. There were audio effects, and if you go all the way out, you're really pretty isolated when you see the geyser field.
Yeah.
And if you wait long enough, you'll see the steamboat come by. And that's not something that you can really put a capacity on.
Mhm.
Although Disney does, because Disney counts everything.
Yeah.
But that's another story. But the point is, people walk away and they go, "Oh, I had such a great time," and they'll post photographs of them near the geyser field, and that's
Yeah.
not what you. That's not what drove your intent to visit, but it may be the memory you come away with. So, as a designer, again, I never was hesitant about trying to plus the show in ways that would give people a moment of discovery, and it might be climb up a hill, see a road, look across at the island, see thunder, big thunder going down on the rivers, creating that beautiful splash. These are things that were really, really important to me. Still are.
Yeah. Anything else to be said about the legends of Frontierland?
No, we should press on because there are miles to go before we sleep. But there's something here, and you can start to see there's kind of parts of ACP which leveraged existing facilities, and there are parts that were new facilities, and we'll get to those in a moment. But the next one which leveraged an existing facility was the Old Mill Ferris wheel in Fantasyland. And you can see in these images where there's this beautiful old mill taken out of or inspired by the Silly Symphony short, The Old Mill, which was, I think, the first movie that used the rotoscope camera to do that beautiful press through view.
The multiplane.
And they built
right?
it. Yeah, the multiplane. Thank you. But they did that, and it was just really extraordinary. And it had a little cafe, little food service underneath, and it was a quiet area, and there was some seating behind it. But again, think ACP's charter was new ride shows and attractions done quickly. And so now this was my project, my first one on this list. And so we had this building, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. What can we do? And going into the archives, you'll find some old pencil sketches of a proposed old mill ride Ferris wheel for the original Disneyland in Anaheim. And, they always say, well, nothing dies at Imagineering. And, it just waits its time. And so here, it waited its time. And I pulled that out and pitched it. And guess what? They said yes to it. And so suddenly I'm off to the races developing and designing our first family junior Ferris wheel. And it's set in a former cafe area, dining area. We purchased the ride from Zer, which is a European company. I spent a lot of time with them. A little bit painful because the tree trunk that supports what appears to be stone, which appears to be connected to the screw, which appears to be powered by the windmill, which in turn powers the Ferris wheel buckets, which in turn appear to be drawing water from the stream that we were going to build. All of these things had to be linked together. But remember, as I just said, except none of that was there except the food service and the old mill on opening day. So I had two things. I had an old mill, I had a need for capacity, ride capacity, and I had this old 45-year-old drawing from the archive. And it was a sketch, and I thought, okay, I can take 1, 2, and 3 and make 10 out of it. So worked with Zer, who's a ride manufacturer, worked with Area Development, and started developing this ride. And again, this is a good example of not a lot of capacity, but it met the criteria of some capacity that thematically was tied into what was there previously on opening day. It thematically fit into Fantasyland. And also I intentionally put the Ferris wheel part as far on the other side of the Ferris wheel as possible, because the last thing I want to do is have a standard amusement park ride in a park, especially a Disney park, especially as one as beautiful as Disneyland Paris.
There had not been a Ferris wheel yet. This was the first one.
This was the first one.
Yeah, and then eventually they did one for
it's not
DCA.
there today, and we'll get to that in a moment. But so I did that, and it also started to do something else because it was part of a bigger project, which was the Storybook Land project. And you can see in this image, after we open the Ferris wheel and it's in operation, you can see people here queuing, and there's a big old green wall next to the railroad track, and beyond it is this mountain of dirt, and the beginning of the berm that masked the side of It's a Small World. And on that mountain of dirt soon would be rising the Storybook Land canals, boats, and Casey Jr. So suddenly it is not one ride, it's actually 3 rides to make a pretty substantial expansion of Fantasyland there in Europe. But the old mill came first, and as I said, it was successful. Actually, I'll put a caveat. I think it was a little bit too successful because, hey, Ferris wheels appeal to whom? It appeals to young children because they get to go up high. It's not very threatening. There's a history in Europe of Ferris wheels and observation towers, so it's immediately appealing to all of those. But the problem is it didn't have enough capacity. So suddenly you have a ride which isn't intended to have a lot of capacity, and guess what? It delivers on the promise. It doesn't have a lot of capacity, which in turn means it becomes a dissatisfier to the park. So, somebody waits an hour and they have their short ride. Doesn't matter how good the ride is, all they remember is, I had a great time, but man, you made me wait too long. So suddenly became a dissatisfier, and they started shutting it down during low season, and then they defaulted to putting holiday packages in it during the holiday season and then running it, and then finally they ran up the white flag and took the Ferris wheel down. And I think right now the screw is there, the tree trunk is there, the stone is there, but the actual buckets and the arms are gone.
Yeah. It is one of those, there are so few like short-lived rides in the history of Disney parks that this is one of those legendary ones that people bring up because it didn't last that long. And it's just such a wild thing because I think because it was a Ferris wheel. People were like, there was a Ferris wheel in a Magic Kingdom style park. I think it's wild to people.
Well, and the hard thing on that was I love the idea, and I hated the idea of having the responsibility, because the worst thing to do is, when you say Ferris wheel, you might as well be saying Carney Park. So how do you take a Ferris wheel and then bring it into one of our Disney parks at that level of quality? Well, there's precedent for that because, at the heart and soul, the first Runaway Mine Coaster train ride was done by Aero and appeared in Six Flags Over Texas. Essentially, heart and soul of Thunder Mountain is a runaway mine train. But I would challenge you to look at Six Flags Over Texas and then look at Thunder Mountain and say, oh, that's the same ride system. So it can be done. Now, it can be done for a lot more work and more money and more time, but it can be done. So the challenge to self was go make a ride that's a standard off-the-shelf ride that has appeared in other parks and customize it in such a way that it looks thoroughly unique and it looks like it was meant to be there. So the intent would be, if you as a guest walked through the park opening year and then came back after we opened the Ferris wheel, you'd go, how did I miss that? That wasn't that there? It looks like it belongs. How did I miss that? Well, the answer is you didn't miss it because it wasn't there. But if I could fool you into believing that because it looks like it was supposed to be there, it was there, there was an issue. There was no issue with that. The other issue, though, that did happen was, remember, there was still the restaurant food service at the base. And when you start mixing the queues for the food service with the queue to the Ferris wheel, there was a problem there. So suddenly you have people lining up for croissants, but they find themselves in the ride line. And so they're spending 20 minutes in the ride line, and they suddenly go around the corner of the old mill and see a Ferris wheel and go, hey, there's no coffee here. I want my croissant. Where's my pain au chocolat? Where's my buttered popcorn? And so that became a dissatisfier. And in retrospect, we should have put the queue marquee on the other side of the Ferris wheel. Probably wouldn't have changed anything ultimately, but I think it would have helped.
So what was it? It was along. So it was alongside the queue for the service window. It was along the side there.
Yeah, it was, as you look at this image, between the Ferris wheel and Small World,
Oh,
there
yeah.
was a small marquee for the old mill, and that's where you entered. But
There are
that's
some remnants
between-
of that queue. In fact, they use it as sort of a meet and greet area now.
They'll do meet and
Yeah.
greets everywhere. I mean, it's the small, what are we going to do with this building? A meet and greet.
Yeah.
Who do we have that they haven't met yet? Oh, we'll stick them in there.
Mm-hmm.
I expect to see characters from Encanto standing in Discoveryland the next time I'm over
Oh
there.
boy. But
I
then,
didn't say that. I have no inside knowledge.
the thing I want to talk about most with this, and it leads into hopefully the next two things on the list. I hope it should, because they're adjacent.
please.
They're adjacent.
Yeah, otherwise we'll be here all night.
They're adjacent, but I did not think about this, and I love this. So obviously this little walk down under the train, which leads to Casey Jr. in Storybook Land, it's reminiscent of Toontown, right? It's this slow slope underneath the train to this area behind the train tracks. But what's fantastic is it's not just this path. There is this little stream to the right that comes by, which is really charming. Every time we've been there in the spring, there's like a duck mother and the babies going down there, which combined with Casey Jr. Storybook Land is just the most adorable scenario you've ever seen. But I didn't think about it, how this bucket ride Ferris wheel was at the base of this stream, and there's a sort of a story reason.
Yeah, there's a story. There's a water source.
Yeah.
And your point's well taken, because here in this photograph, you can see diners sitting, dining, and there's a green construction wall, and there's another green wall on top of the train trestle. Because first, remember, there was no train trestle there, because there was no reason, because there was no Storybook Land.
Yeah.
So step one, build a train trestle. So we built the train trestle, but in order to get under the train trestle, you had to go down. And the train trestle is wonderful for carrying trains. It's also terrific for blocking your view of the new land expansion. So how do you get people there? And that's when I thought, well, we'll put water there. People love water. Water moves. We'll have water moving into the expansion of Fantasyland. That makes sense. At least it did to me. So we had the water, and it again paid off by saying, okay, that's the water source that the old buckets, as it came down, they picked up the water, they lifted up. I don't know where they took the water. I didn't think that far ahead, but didn't need to, so I didn't. Hey, it's Fantasyland. Guess what? It's a fantasy. But it gave us the excuse then to bring the water and have it slowly cascade down and then go underneath the trestle, which hopefully you as a guest will follow.
Yeah.
And then it expands into this larger body of water that is right in front of the massive storybook for the canal boats. So that's your payoff. And once I get you there, I've gotten you out of Fantasyland, the old Fantasyland, the new Fantasyland, under the train track. I get you to the canal boat entry, marquee and queue. Right there off to the left, there's a nice sign that says, oh, continue on to Casey Jr. And because Casey Jr. is above the canal boats, it's kinetic. It's, moving around, and it's following the old, Disneyland, Tomorrowland rule of the world on the move. If you put movement, people are intrigued by it. They're curious. They follow it. And so people are just drawn to find out, hey, what is that? What is that over there? Here's one little note I'll make is when you look at the queue signs, both for Casey Jr. and Storybook Land, all the directionals, and the Casey Jr. sign, the directional, if you bring on screen one of the queue or the marquee for Dumbo, the Flying Element, it's the same style because I wanted to leverage the same style. Some designers say, oh, if I'm going to build a new land, I want to build a new land. And my attitude is, no, I've got to fit in the old land. It can be an expansion of, an addition to, but it can't break the rules. So the marquees for Casey Jr. and Storybook, as far as directionals, are the same style as Casey Jr. I'm sorry, as Dumbo.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense that Casey Jr. also from Dumbo, so there's a strong connection
and again,
there.
the note about that is, remember, how many people see Dumbo? And right now I'd say probably fewer and fewer are going to be seeing Dumbo,
Yeah.
given the content.
Yeah.
But beautifully animated film. It's definitely a product of its time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a product of its time. But so you have to. I assume as a designer, I have to tell you a story as if you've never heard it before. So in my mind, I start my pitches when I'm pitching a new project is once upon a time. Even if I don't say it, that's what's in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm telling you, Tom, a story about a character in a movie that I assume you've never seen.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got to make it accessible that you can immediately dial into it. And then at the same time, don't make you work so hard. If I have to give you 3 pages of homework before you get on a 4-minute ride, I haven't done my job.
Yeah, and I mean,
So anyway.
there's a lot of visual cues as you go through the queue, right? You have like the little sort of circus posters for different animal acts, right? And the signage definitely has
those.
train elements, right? So I guess is that how you're trying to establish a story for people that may not know the story coming in, right?
Exactly, because remember, the idea, the couple things about, well, we can move on and talk about Casey Jr. in detail.
Mm-hmm.
Casey Jr. was a powered coaster. It's the only one Disney's ever done.
Mm-hmm.
Very disappointed about that, but that was supplied by Vekoma. It was something that's in their catalog. And the nice thing about a powered coaster is, A, it's powered, which means I've got electricity, which means I can have audio. So I can have a synchronized musical score,
Mm-hmm.
which is a good thing, especially if you have the Casey Jr. song playing. The second thing is, because it's a powered coaster, unlike Anaheim, where you have to have an operator where the cold car is to actually reach into the bowels of the engine to turn it on and turn it off and regulate the speed. The operator hits the start and you take off. So the cold car behind the engine in Paris actually is a guest seat.
Mm-hmm.
So that was good. They suddenly had more capacity, which makes operators so happy. Capacity, good.
And less staffing, which is also good for the operator.
Yeah, and there's a story about that with the canal boats we'll get to in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
But back on this, the reason there's those animal posters are the guests maybe ask themselves, I see people in cages being pulled by a train.
Why are people
Why do I want to get in a cage?
Oh.
So you want to set it up immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, it's not a cage. You are an animal. Animals are going to the circus. They're being transported in a happy circus train by a engine which has a face on it, so it's alive. So we mean you no harm as we take you around the upper regions of Storybook Land. And you can, you have variable speed, so you can go faster and slower. You can go up hills where you hear the I think I can, I think I can, I think I can cue.
Mm-hmm.
You then coast down where we increase the speed. You have, again, the music from Casey Jr. And there are things to see. All of the little scenes in Storybook you get to see, but not from the canal boat viewpoint, but from the Casey Jr.'s viewpoint.
Yeah.
So we were using basically double duty. Whatever we built for the canal, you'd be able to see it from Casey.
You get up close and personal with some stuff that's really far away from you on the canal boats, right? So like the Beast Castle, I mean, that's the most vivid thing in my head right now is the train just whizzing by that castle really close.
Yeah, and you can see that in this shot where the castle is very, very close.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because we waited a very long time to do another castle, and that one was in Tokyo Disneyland. So it's Beauty and the Beast is something, one of those attractions people keep asking, let's do it, let's do it, let's do it. And the fine tradition of WDI never letting the idea go to waste. Yeah. Eventually they did do it, but they did it in Tokyo.
And we got a big expensive restaurant that has $62 brunch.
Yeah, I think actually isn't the castle, you can confirm this, that I believe the Beast Castle in Tokyo is larger or taller than the castle in Anaheim's Disneyland.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's big.
It's very
big.
Large.
Not a small
very
thing.
Large.
So we have this Casey Jr. and then we started to look at things. Well, what else do? You do canal boats, and again, I default to things I love, and I love the canal boats. I actually rented a canal boat in England and went up the Grand Union Canal
Hmm.
in England on a holiday, and I made a mistake. I'm 6'3", and canal boats are about 6 feet, 6.5 feet wide,
Yeah.
and about 6 foot high, and I'm 6'3", as I just mentioned. So there's a couple of times when it's ouch, 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 and then I realized I basically need to spend my 1 week holiday in a bent over position in order to enjoy my vacation.
Yeah.
So I did that. But anyway, that's research. And so I take this research and I start thinking, well, I've got Casey Jr. I want to do that. And I knew how much capacity I had. I knew the length of the train because, again, we're buying a pretty standard ride off of Vekoma,
Hmm.
although we're going to customize it to death. And so I work in layout in a way that, I don't know, it's probably way old school, but I learned it from Ron Toomer, who was the designer for so many of the rides at Aero Development.
Hmm.
And he used wire, but I used string to lay out my ride tracks. I've done a number of coasters at Disney, Rock and Roller Coaster, Casey Jr., Go Coaster, and others. And so I took string. I'd go out and get this really white, cheap string that you could buy at Home Depot. Or,
Hmm.
and I lay it out. I go, okay, I'm going to go this many feet. I can cover this many feet at this speed. And I need this speed in order to have this much ride capacity.
Hmm.
And I've got this piece of land. So I lay my string out. And I kind of manipulate it. And I manipulate it. And I get a piece of gator board, foam board. And I get the plan. I get some white trace paper. And I lay the plan down. And I had a civil drawing because the entire park had been surveyed. And so I lay it all down, make this little sandwich, and lay my string out. And then look at little pieces of paper and then put a little sketch down and plug it in and then call Tom Morris in to show him what I was doing and say, do you like it or no? And, yes, he'd say, yes, more of this, less of that. And so I take my string and it was all push pins. So I'd pull the pins out and I rearrange my string.
Hmm.
And then I'd take my board over to the ride engineers and say, look at this. Is this brilliant? And they go, you're kidding. Why are you giving me string? But I talk them through it and they go, yeah, you could do that. And so they would take my string sculpture and then actually do a layout for the track. And that's what we ended up with. True story.
Wow. String.
So
Oh, I
we
gotta
have it.
hold. I have to ask this. I have to ask about Return to Oz. I have to because this is, I think, for those of us that go to Paris now, it is this bizarre moment of not only is there a Return to Oz scene at the end of Storybook Land, but also it's playing the music from the Main Street Electrical Parade when that had a finale for Return to Oz, a Disney movie most people have long forgotten at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting that you should bring that up, Tom. So as we dial back, to Storybook Land in Anaheim, you on the canal boat are going past all the beautiful sets and little miniature villages of Pinocchio and Toad Hall and Agrabah and the like. And the operator tells you, Tom, and me, Jim, what we're looking at.
Yeah.
And they'll usually say things like, oh, you can't see Toad because he's inside his little house having tea. Well, remember, in Paris, you don't have an operator.
Yeah.
And if you did, they'd have to say it in 6 languages, which means you're way past Toad Hall before they get through the 6 languages. So the answer to the question that the guest star asked was, I don't know what that building is. You're telling me it's Toad Hall. I have a little plaque saying Toad Hall, or it's Eric's Castle, or I didn't see that movie. I don't know what you're talking about. So the solution shortly thereafter was hit him over the head. And so little figures were commissioned for Chernabog and Ariel and the Wizard of Oz characters. And so they're all in there. And I should point out here that Canal Boats is it's a retelling of international fairy tales. And the reason Oz is there because it's an American fairy tale. of all of the fairy tales, Americans don't really have fairy tales
Yeah.
except for Wizard of Oz. You have Wizard of Oz and Wizard of Oz and more Wizard of Oz. So you have Wizard of Oz. And if you go back to that movie you just quoted of Return to Oz, there really isn't that 30-second clip or that 2-minute clip of music that you listen to and go, wow, I'm stirred. I feel good about life. This is the end of the ride. I feel really great. Oh, that's that's the cherry on this wonderful ride experience you've given me. Can't wait to ride it again. So Main Street Electrical gives you all of, answers those questions. Why? It's quick, it's snappy, it's peppy, it's fun. It sends you off the ride in a happy, joyous mood. So yeah, it's. I wish the Return of Oz had a great, musical score. But if it did, we probably had a Return to Oz 2 and 3 and 4 and series on Disney Plus and.
Then we wouldn't have had Oz the Great and Powerful, which was a huge box office success.
Oh, I love Sam Raimi, but not everything's a home run.
Yeah,
you're lucky to get a bunt or a strike. I've seen it. I actually made it through in one pass. I'm still trying to dig my way through the internals, but that's a different story. I do that in chapters. I'm about halfway through.
Yeah.
It's like getting my COVID shot. I'll go get the COVID shot 1, 2, the booster, the 4th booster. Eventually, I'll be immune. I'll get through Eternals, I promise.
Okay, so we've talked about the Fantasyland expansion, which, by the way, is just like the most charming little area. I love it back there. It feels so secluded,
It is.
and the hillsides are beautiful, and it's serene, and the trees is the backdrop. It's a really great little area.
It's successful, and I think it's the most beautiful we've ever done. I'm happy and very privileged to have been part of not building the original, but adding to it. And again, my commission was not mess it up.
Yeah.
So then turning a little bit, rounding the corner on the backside, as I said early in the broadcast, we have a certain amount of money, we have a certain amount of time, we have a certain mandate to deliver so much capacity. So not everything is elaborate as anything else. The Fantasyland expansion was a big influx of capital, big commitment. What wasn't a big influx of capital was Chaparral Theater over in Frontierland. There was a bit of land that's been looked at for a number of things, public knowledge that they looked at it for the expansion pad for Splash Mountain. The Paris version of Splash Mountain was going there in one public scenario, and they talked about that, but they didn't build that. And hey, so let's go build a theater, outdoor theater with simple bench seating, where the park could come in and use it as a flex space to do entertainment and meet and greet, or basically anything they want.
Yeah.
And it's not such a large commitment that they couldn't tear it down. Sometimes it's a race between, is the park going to tear it down, or will the mosquitoes and termites tear it down for you? It's a race to the finish. But they did. They built it. Eventually they enclosed it. Eventually they tore it down, and I think they rebuilt it. But when it was opened as Chaparral Theater, it gave the park and Frontierland an anchor at the far end of that park, a draw to go back and see some entertainment. Again, back then, it was right next to the train station, and right next to that was an animal petting farm.
Yeah.
So, you're walking through Frontierland, and once you pass Thunder Station, well, there's Cowboy Cookout, and then you keep walking, and then there's the petting farm, then you keep walking, then there's Chaparral Stage, and you keep walking, and finally, at the end of your day, you're there at the Frontierland train station. So it's something way back there to draw you.
Yeah, because there was no weenie to get you back there. There was no big draw. The like playground. I think back in the day, the canoes used to load somewhere back there. Yeah, and then that offshoot with the train station and the theater and the petting zoo. I do like that area a lot though, because it does feel like that's you're going off into the woods out past Thunder Mesa. And I like that kind of. I don't know. It makes that land feel so much more complete. That you have the town, but then you also have like the outskirts of town. It's just a very complete land, and it tells a very complete story, right?
Right, it does. And to your point, you have the barn, the cowboy cookout barn, and what do you have next to the barn? Well, you have the animals that would go into the barn at night, and then you have the woods, and so you get a strong sense of that is the wilderness. There is no more. There's nothing beyond this point. You've left the town behind.
Yeah.
Up Thunder Mesa, and now you're out in the wilderness, where the settlers are. And if you take the ship around the island, then you see the old man rocking on his chair on the bench of his hut, who has, by the way, a twin brother who's sitting in Anaheim right now, and he has a large extended family. For some reason, they all look alike, and they're in every park.
Yeah.
Go figure. But it does tell that wonderfully complete story, and it was a good thing. It was not a bad thing, and it helped. So that was a kind of a minor note, but an important note. So moving on. Now we get back to spending some money and spending some time. And again, not my project, but we had a small team, so I was aware of this. But it was Indiana Jones and the Temple Apparel. So in ACP, you want to have some things which are driving intent to visit from the guest. And again, Disney Paris, Euro Disneyland had a lot of firsts. In addition to Casey Jr. having the first powered coaster, Indiana Jones and the Temple Apparel was the first inverting coaster for Disney. And so now you had a coaster that, was quote unquote a standard layout, but suddenly got this beautiful overlay, and it was Chris Tietz and Pat Burke and some other brilliant designers who worked on it. And they built the temple out of Drive It, which you're familiar. It's a material I don't think is being used now because time moves on, technology improves. But at the time, it was a different way of building, where you could build a piece like the top of the temple on the ground and then crane it up to put it on the top of structural steel or other support. So rather than carve in place, you could carve in the ground, which worked for that project because it wasn't integrated with the ride. And in reality, the ride was built, and then you built the two temples around it. Nothing in the temple really ever touches the ride. Everything is just slightly off the ride. And but it had some really good moments. Excuse me. You can see in this image the beautiful staircase. That's all broken, and you go past the two cobra snakes that are on either side of you, and then there were burners at the top of the staircase and at the front of the ride. So as you approached it, they were gas fed and they were on fire. So day or night, there'd be, well, again, because it's Europe where it's cold, you could stand 40 feet away and you'd feel the heat of these burners. And you had the snakes, which made a reappearance in Anaheim when they built their version of Temple Apparel. Much smaller, of course, baby snakes. And they have those. But Temple Apparel served a number of purposes. And one of them, you can see in this image from Adventure Isle, the upper part of Adventure Isle, you could look across, and Mon Valley will do one thing for you. It is a great place to grow trees. And so things that were planted within 3 and 4 years were densely grown in. And so by having the temple poke above the tree line, it gave you something to go back to. You could see as a guest, if you're in Adventure Isle, you can see the temple. If you're in Fantasyland or Pirates, you can see the temple. It's following the old rule of the weenie rule of, let's put something in the distance that draws me as a guest toward it. So whether it's the castle, or in this park, the Red Queen's Castle, or if you're in the Red Queen's Castle, you can look across at the Treehouse, or Thunder Mountain, or Discovery Mountain, or Space Mountain. So there's always something to draw you further and
Yeah.
deeper into the park.
It's
And
a
this
vista
image,
that's like out of a movie, right? I mean, especially I know when you go up to the treehouse around dusk, the sun always sets kind of behind the temple, and it's just this beautiful vista with the, all in shadow, the temple above the tree line. It's really gorgeous.
yeah, and then you have the natural landscape of the Bois behind, you know, behind the temple, which is, outside of the Disney property, but it's still a French wood, a bois. And so you have all the foreground and with water, and then mid-ground you have the temple and the jungle, and in the far distance you have this enormous, very dense and convincing real forest. So it's just a beautiful thing that you look at, and it draws people toward it. In fact, in this image you can see the opening day crowd, and Indiana Jones had an enormous queue, and it needed every square meter they had, because in this image you can see people snaking all the way across, and it was just completely crowded. So day one, it was a huge capacity draw, so much so that they added a second. Well, they had two cars in the train, but they were two cars, two rows of seat in each car, two, and two. And then they changed it. They got new cars to do two, 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 two. So they increased the capacity simply because, as you can see, look at all these people in the line. They want a ride, and they were on a ride yesterday. So it was a way of meeting that demand.
And once they got the capacity up, I know that's when it was discussed that they were like, oh, well, this is a viable thing for other parks. And OLC bought it. And even though it's in a land that is mostly themed to Indiana Jones, they decided not to theme it to Indiana Jones. It is its own story. It's called Raging Spirits.
Who knew that? But again, in Indiana Jones, the one question that I always scratch head on is beyond the sign that says Indiana Jones du Temple de Paris. There's no Indiana Jones there.
No.
You could remove this sign, and you're going to call it Temple of Peril and be done with it. Whereas Raging Spirits is the name of the ride you just referred to in Tokyo Disney Sea.
Yeah.
So, gee whiz, maybe we could switch signs. Take the sign, cut it off in Paris, put it on the plane, take it to
But because of that
Tokyo.
sign, not only the first looping coaster, it's the first Indiana Jones ride that existed.
Yeah, Lucasfilm and George Lucas came over for that. I mean, you happen to tickle my memory stick. That doesn't sound as obscene as hopefully it sounded, but this is why, Tom, you're a bad influence on me. Every time we meet,
I've heard that from so many Imagineers.
Yeah. So anyway, back to the story as we recover quickly. So George Lucas, we're going to have the opening of Indiana Jones in Paris.
Yeah.
And George came over. He happened to be in Europe, and they coordinated his schedule. And he happened to be coming from Paris from London, where he was on business. And so it was at night, and we had him coming over, and he was late. And he came at night, and it's cold and it's windy, and there's rain because, hey, it's cold, it's windy, it's cold season in Paris. What do you expect? And so, George comes out and he makes a very short appearance. But during the appearance, he says something effective. I now christen Indiana Jones de Temple de Paris. And at that point, they open the cage on the doves, because you can't have an opening without birds. And so, I can't make this up. So the cage opens up, the birds fly out. Remember the wind? Winds and birds don't mix. So all the birds fly free, and then suddenly the wind hits them and slams them into the temple.
Oh.
So you're standing and the crowd goes, because you start to hear this. You can insert bird noise, crashing sounds here. But I will say this, no one ever will forget that ride opening.
There you go. And then eventually they decided to run it backwards for a while, which was...
They did, and it was a huger success than it was before.
Yeah.
The problem with that is, you make something preferred capacity again, you know, when it's not preferred. But unfortunately, or fortunately, Indiana Jones was preferred capacity day one. It's never not been popular.
Mm.
Hence, buy new trains to increase capacity. But then from a marketing standpoint, remember, this is a park that went a very long time before getting anything. In fact, the last ride that was open was Buzz Lightyear Astro Blaster, and I designed that. And that was the last new ride that opened.
2006, 7?
Yeah.
Somewhere in
It
that
was a
zone.
while ago.
Yeah.
It was a while ago. So, when you don't have something new, you do need something new to talk about. So marketing goes, well, can we run it backwards? Can we say Temple of Peril now running backwards?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do that. So they had something to talk about, and it ran backwards for a very long time.
And everyone's okay with that one. The one they've done twice now that no one's okay with is what they've done to Space Mountain, but we'll save that conversation for another time.
Oh, well, I really never mentioned that to Tim Delaney because I don't want to be there for the reaction, but I love the original Space Mountain.
Yeah.
I love Discovery Mountain. I saw the marquee. They had the marquee up. They had the marquee up.
Yeah.
And visiting Tom later, how do I do that? Tim later, he had the D from Discovery Mountain in his office.
Oh, that's
because,
cool.
Hey, you had to build it. You put it in, and Eisner changed his mind, and it became Space Mountain. And so, what do you do with the marquee? Well, the D went to Tim. Anyway, long story short, I'd walk into Space Mountain, and you go around the light lock, and then suddenly you're in the mountain, and you'd walk through the center of the mountain. You'd look around, and there's the coaster all around you, which is a wonderful show. Certainly took your mind off the queue, and it also gave you the opportunity to go, oh, it's a roller coaster? Oh, I don't want to do that. That exit sign looks really charming right now, so people would self-select not to ride.
Yeah.
And then they closed it. They put up louvers and broke my heart because now you're just going through it. And, Hyperspace Mountain, I get why they did that. I understand why they did Mission 2. But there's a soft part of my point of my heart going, oh, I really would love to see a classic Space Mountain brought back for the 30th.
Yeah, I think that's what we were all hoping for. They addressed it on a pass holder live stream today. They came out because enough people have been tweeting, I think some hashtag of bring back the moon or something like that. So they addressed it today, and they said there are no plans at this time to get rid of Hyperspace Mountain, and everyone collectively went, oh.
Well, here's the deal about that. I would present to you there's no reason to build a Galaxy's Edge at the Disney Studios because you've got in Park 1, you've got Star Tours, you have a restaurant, you have the Diopolis, which has a show, Star Tours show, you have a meet and greet for Star Tours, you've got the X-Wing in the middle of the land. I mean, if you want to, you've got Star Tours, Star Wars in the park. So you really don't need you fix things if they're broken. Space Mountain wasn't broken, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And yes, you probably would not do the moon with a Ponte projector because we've moved on. But if you could bring 2022 technology to that story conceit, I think it'd be a home run.
And the new trains are gorgeous. They match the original attraction very nicely. They fit that theme.
It's not a long reach to do it, and it's something that you can do. And actually, reality is, if you really, really, really want to with new technology, just like Anaheim, you could flip the switch on their Space Mountain and go from classic Space Mountain to Hyperspace Space Mountain on a seasonal basis. So I would be the champion to say, guys, spend a dime, spend $1, you'll make 10 back.
Yeah, I mean, people love that Space Mountain. What's crazy is, I think in the other parks around the world, especially the older ones, we've lost some original thematic intent in some of those parks. And then Disneyland Paris, kind of the blessing of the financial troubles has been that a lot of that 1992 thematic intent has survived except for one land, right? That one land is Discovery Land where, various things have happened, or maybe it was just easier to find things in the, more modern times that fit that theme loosely and put them in there. But What's amazing about Paris, I think, it is this. If you love that sort of old style, 90s era Imagineering storytelling, like it is very much alive and still kicking
It is.
in Paris. And that's what I love about it, is that's the decade I grew up in, and that's the Disney I fell in love with. And so that's why I love that park so much, is there's so much of that spirit is there.
Yeah, it is. Your Disneyland is a time capsule, and as you said, part of it is because they had the financial difficulties, and so when you don't have money, you don't do new things, you don't
No.
paint, you don't replace, and so that's why you're running the Indiana Jones trains backwards, because that's all you can afford.
Yeah.
But as the nice thing about it is, you do keep the original design intent. Now, luckily, since since the Walt Disney Company purchased the outstanding stock and now sole owner, there may be a few shares somewhere in someone's mattress, but they are the owner. When you have Captain Hook's ship, they rebuilt it. When you have the castle, they rebuilt it, and so on and so on. They can do that now, but had they had money when the Captain Hook ship started to crumble, the faster, cheaper way would have been, just demo it. It's, just give it a push. It's already leaning. Termites have already eaten their fill. Let's just push it over and replace it with someone else. And eventually guests say, there was a ship there? Like what you said earlier about the old mill Ferris wheel.
Yeah.
There was a Ferris wheel in this park? What?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a great couple of years, right? I mean, the refreshing of that park has been a wonderful thing to watch, and not even just those bigger refurbishments like Pirates and Phantom Manor and Big Thunder, but also those little projects like rebuilding the castle, rebuilding the ship, right?
Yeah, and originally, it proves out the original decision from Michael Eisner. When it came time to the choice of, do you build in Barcelona along the lines of a Walt Disney World, of making Barcelona a destination, because it doesn't have a large population base. What you'd build as far as visitors would be people who come to visit Barcelona. Or do you build in Paris, which is, I think, the most visited city for tourism on the globe, and then tie off of that. And that was the decision made. And reality is, opening day, Euro Disneyland was extremely successful in the number of guests it attracted, not in the amount of money it made, for various other reasons. But creatively, it was a home run. People responded to it, except for a few French farmers who, had a thing about setting fire to their hay bales in front of the entrance to the parking lot.
Yeah.
Except for that, the park was successful. And as we said earlier in the start of the broadcast, it's amazing. Euro Disneyland has had more near-death experiences than any other of the Disney parks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shall we move on?
Yeah. What's left?
Well, there are a couple.
Okay.
So back to this, we're back to talking about leveraging. So leveraging, of course, we have Aladdin. So earlier on, we talked about there are projects which leverage existing facilities, and those are attractive because you don't have to pay for a new building. We also talked about walkthroughs, like, the one in Frontierland for Legends of the Old West, and the castle for that story. Well, the other one was to take part of the arcade in Adventureland, which no one used, and build off of the hit movie Aladdin. Again, it's a long time ago, but it was a movie, and Michael Eisner said, this is a hit movie. How quickly can I get it in the park? And you can see in this image a much younger me painting a mural late at night in the cold, because Tom Morris told me to, for the Aladdin walkthrough attraction. And the story on that one was, it was a small project. So when I sold that in Glendale, I ended up following it all the way through. And I did the models, I built the models, I may have a photograph I can share with you of the models for the Aladdin walkthrough in Paris. And I followed the models over to Birmingham, England. I flew to Paris. They put me in a car. They drove me across because we didn't have the channel then. So we drove across and they dropped me off in Birmingham and said, we'll see you in 2 weeks. And 4 months later, I got released and spent my time living in a hotel in the center of France, or in the center of London, which was in the Bauhaus style. If you're familiar, that's a concrete style. And I found out later a lot of prisons use the same contractor. And I may have a photograph of that to share with you, but it was a Hilton. And after 6 weeks, I said, please let me out because you gave me a south-facing room. North-facing room, and I haven't seen the light of day. I'm turning into a mushroom. So put me on the other side of the hotel. And I would go every morning out to Brixton. And Brixton is where Kempton Walker was located. They were a vendor to build all the sets for Aladdin. They did all the sculpts, they did the animation. It was a turnkey operation. And I had a little office there in the factory. And one day I noticed, hey, there are bars in my office. Why? So I said, oh, didn't they tell you? Our neighbor is the prison. So outside your window are all the bad boys who are in the prison in Brixton. Didn't we tell you that? And I went, no, you didn't share that piece of information with me. So I turned quickly and said, let's move faster. Let's build this faster. But, time being what it is, we built, and then, 4 months later, finished the project, had it all built. Now comes time to install. So packed everything up on 2 flatbed trailers, and we put it on barges, ships, and traveled over to Mandeville and started to install. Because it was using an existing facility, we had to build new walls. And when it came time to do propping, there were leftover ropes and jars in the warehouse that were used in Adventureland, or they were planned to be used for Adventureland. Didn't happen. So I came through and helped them myself to props, ropes, jars, shields, swords, whatever I could find that thought, well, that kind of looks like it could be coming from the movie. I'll take that. And went through and installed them in the show. Because the idea, when I say show, the idea behind the Aladdin walkthrough was, I love the old Emporium down in Disneyland. And it used to be that you'd walk through the Emporium on Main Street and you'd see animated sets from whatever new movie they wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
And they were beautifully done. They were art directed frequently by the production designers of that animated film.
Yeah.
They were also animated, and they were beautifully appointed. I thought, ooh, what if we did a much larger scale of one of those as a permanent installation? Because we're not going to do an Aladdin ride, but let's do a show quality as if it were a ride. So imagine, instead of you're being 2 meters tall, now you're a half a meter tall, to scale to those sets. And all the sets are separated one from another behind glass. So you never can be anywhere in the ride or in the show and look at from one scene to the other. So it's always that discrete moment we're going, oh, there's the snake. I'm turning the left. Now I'm in the Cave of Wonders. Now I'm turning to the right. I see the next scene. And you tell us a story book report of the Aladdin movie. And what was interesting is we're in France. And so all the music was the French version of You Never Had a Friend Like Me. And all the other music from the movie. And that proved a challenge because French and English have different lengths. So I would have to cut the music to the length of the scene because the music would be audio zoned. So as you're going from one scene to the next, that the music would have to transition and bridge over. But anyway, that went well. And, I finally finished that job. Tom let me off of my leash, and I was happy to do it because I finished in January, and I was painting the walls. I had some arc lights to keep the paints warm because the acrylic paints would freeze. I could put on another coat, but the paints had to be paramount. And so I did that. And that's almost the last, next to the last one, but briefly, and as we're rounding the turn here, we have the Euro Disneyland Railroad train.
Mhm.
When the park opened, every land had a station except Discoveryland.
Yeah.
And so part of ACP was adding another train, and then, of course, putting another railroad station in, because once you have another train, you need to have a train stop, and they added another train station for the train. And again, it was a matter of, oh, another train equals more capacity.
Mhm.
And that was a minor note, but something that was nice for them.
Part of
And then
the
finally-
reason they held off, correct me if I'm wrong, when Discovery Mountain was first drawn up, it was one of these things they never built. These mega structures that housed like several attractions, right? Wasn't there a plan at one point that maybe the train station would have been in the back edge of that or something along those lines?
Yeah, they talked about that, and there were a lot of conversations. The story I heard was at one point, Space Mountain, Discovery Mountain was actually going to be a dome. Think about old Wonders of Life in Epcot, where you go into the dome and then and it acts as a hub, and you go out to Body Wars, you go out to Making a Me, or you go out to Cranium Command. This would operate the same way. You'd go into Discovery Mountain, and then you'd go off to the coaster, kind of like Guardians of the Galaxy is now, or going to be. So you'd have the gravity building way over there outside of the mountain. And that was the conceit. Part of the reason for that was that in low capacity days, like the winter, when few people come to the park, they could close everything in the park but Discoveryland. So you'd come in, you get a less expensive ticket, board the train at Main Street, train would take you around Discoveryland, you'd exit, and you'd have all of Discoveryland to explore. And everything in Space Mountain, Discovery Mountain would be the entrance to the rides. So you had covered conditioned space, so you could run the park all year.
That made
And
sense.
there's
And
artwork
also,
out there.
we'll show it right now, actually. Even with the tunnel that would have connected Discovery Mountain, it's there essentially where the tunnel would have been that connected to Videopolis. So you would have been able to get people the food and beverage without them going outside too.
There are photographs out there of the staircase in the planter that connected to Videopolis, and I remember walking through thinking and asking, doesn't that block the view of Star Tours? And people went, shh, don't say anything. And then literally the next day, Michael Eisner came through and said, that staircase blocks the view of Star Tours. And I hand over heart, within 72 hours, that staircase was scrapped. Obviously I have no power, but Michael did. So, the connections between between Space Mountain, Discovery Mountain, and Videopolis, there was no need for it. Partly because the mountain was not a hub any longer. It was going to be a ride. But you can still see the remnant, and maybe there's a photograph you can share with the viewers of these two donut holes
I've got
protruding in Videopolis. But we're kind of getting to the last piece, which is then Nautilus, and this is
my favorite.
Yeah, it is my favorite, but I've always mixed, because one of the rides or shows or attractions for ACP that was announced was Bonjour Mickey. After the success of Mickey's Toontown, and which came after Mickey's Birthday Land or Starland or Toontown Fair, pick your poison. Meet Mickey in a controlled condition space was really popular. And at the time they had Mickey standing out in the rain on Main Street, just outside the arcade on Main Street, outside the Liberty Arcade. And that was not good. So the park said, we'd really love to have a Meet Mickey. And so having done Meet Mickey, I did all the work, models, drawings, etc. And it went very, very far to build a Meet Mickey version for Disneyland Paris, and it was going to be in the berm between the castle and Teacups. And again, this public knowledge, it's out there. Not breaking news here, sorry Tom. It's out in the wild. But anyway, it came down to the point of that day, which all designers dread, where they bring you to the room, and literally it was Michael and Tony and a few others, and we stand around and getting down to Michael saying, Tony, you can have, meet Mickey, keep Mickey out standing in the rain. People love Mickey, they'll find him, they'll stand out in the rain to meet Mickey, or you can have the Nautilus. And the choice was made to build the Nautilus because, hey, you'll never get the Nautilus again. And hey, look at this photograph on, we're sharing of the lagoon and the cascading water. And
I mean, it's fantastic.
The water is the front piece to the cannon and the lighthouse and the mountain. And it's just, imagine Discovery Mountain without any of that foreground.
Yeah. I was going to say, Tony wanted to build a Nautilus from, late 70s, early 80s with Discovery Bay. It was like the last missing piece of what he could resurrect from Discovery Bay, right? So I'm not surprised. I know it was very close to his heart. So I'm not at all shocked that the Nautilus won the fight.
Yeah, and don't forget Tom. Don't forget Tom Sharaman. Always massacre his name. But Tom S., the master of all things Nautilus, the man who rebuilt his apartment.
Yeah.
Remodeled it as the Nautilus, and then
I love that this story is in both interviews. I love that this has stuck with people so much that they have to tell this story.
Well, this is sad because I'm happy you're happy right now, but it does have a sad ending because Tom. I saw Tom twice before he passed, and once was he stood in the Nautilus cockpit there in Euro Disneyland, and we had a photograph of him. At the helm of the Nautilus, his Nautilus, at the helm driving the Nautilus in Euro Disneyland. And that's a great moment, that he could have. The second thing was over in Chastain, where again, now the Disneyland Paris, formerly Euro Disneyland team, was housed. I was walking down the hall, and at this point, Tom was sick, gravely ill, and I saw him, and he was shrunken, but he was still Tom, and we talked for a moment. And he turned and said, goodbye, I won't be back. And, he turned the corner and he passed away within the day, 2 days at most.
Wow.
But, the good news is, he lived to see his Nautilus that started with transforming, gutting his apartment, horrifying his landlady, building a full-size Nautilus that he could stand at the helm of, to pilot it in Euro Disneyland Mont-d'Orbigny, France.
Yeah, and the impact that's had on so many people, that vista of that with the mountain. I mean, for me, that was, I don't know, I grew up watching that movie. I know it's outside of my time frame, but I mean, that Harper Goff Nautilus is just everything. And so to finally see that, obviously I remember the ride one in Florida, but I don't know, the one in Paris feels real. It feels like the real Nautilus.
I don't know why that is either, because there's the other Nautilus in this mysterious island at Tokyo Disney Sea.
Yeah.
And even though it's supposed to be Volcania and it has everything that should be in Volcania, something about the Nautilus in Euro Disneyland touches me, and I think it touches others. And I think it goes to the heart and soul of why Disneyland Paris still resonates with all of us, and that is that it draws on the DNA of Disneyland Anaheim. It's a fantasy. It's a fairy tale. It's a fantasy, and you can't argue with a fantasy or a fairy tale. Either you accept it or you deny it. And once you accept it, then you just continue with it, and you continue all the way through with it. And so, maybe something's not quite right, but because it's so convincing, because the designers were so sincere and we tried so hard to deliver on the promise of Euro Disneyland, that I think after 30 years, it still resonates with guests.
Yeah. Also, you get to walk into this Nautilus and everything is kind of how you imagined it would be, right? I mean,
yeah, and it's that, and plus it has, to me, one of the great fake outs of all entrances, where you go in this little lighthouse and you go down the spiral staircase and you swear 5 francs that you just entered the Nautilus during the walkthrough, when in fact you went into a show building on the other side of the trees and hedges next to the Utopia, and you never had a clue that that's what was going to happen.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic.
So anyway, that's my story. And then finally, at the end of the time, I was done, and we all got beautiful little trophies. And here on this image,
Yeah.
you can see what we got. We've got this box of beautiful little pins
I've never seen this
inscribed in
before.
appreciation of
This
your
is
efforts.
fantastic.
It's not fun, it's not a computer, it's somebody who actually drew this by hand,
It's great.
lettered it by hand, old timey. And you have these beautiful pins on Tom Gillian's artwork, isometric of the original Euro Disneyland, with all of the pins for that project.
Beautiful.
So we got that. I got mine, and it sits in a place of honor right over here with my Euro Disneyland books and my other park books, and it was a special time. And thank you, Tom, as always, for inviting me to share a little bit about my time at Disney working on these projects.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, it's a very special park, and you got to be a part of so many attractions that, even though they weren't there on opening day, they are such indelible parts of what that park is. Like I said before, and this came up in Eddie's interview as well, is when people ask me, like, well, what do I have to do at Disneyland Paris? My answer is never like rides. Like, sure, Phantom Manor and Pirates and Big Thunder come up, but a lot of it is explore the park and the details, and a lot of that is those walk-through attractions. Those walk-through spaces are so special. They're so intimate because they're never that crowded. It feels like such a personal moment you have with the park in those spaces. They are just some of the most special spots that exist in any of the 12 parks ever done. And I think this park in particular, those walk-through spaces never get duplicated. There are so few things I've experienced at the other parks around the world that match the specialness or the detail or the charm of those.
Well, and think about one of the reasons is whenever you have a ride, there's a throughput that's required.
Yeah.
And which means you're going to be putting lots of people, and you're standing there with strangers. You're riding with strangers.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know these people. You're standing in a queue with strangers, people you don't know. Whereas in a walkthrough, you can create space. You can walk in. If there are people behind you, you can hang back.
Yeah.
And finally, you can be alone in that space. It's a story for being told to you. And that's unique. It's something that's not in every park. I think, it's something that should be in more parks, and I'm surprised that it's not in more parks.
Yeah.
Because it's a crowd pleaser.
Yeah, I think there's the fixation on rides now, and and at that 3 to 5 minute rides, right? So it's kind of in some cases it's kind of a lost art a little bit.
Well, it's interesting because you touched on a rod here with me. I hear over and over again that people's attention span is shorter.
Yeah.
And that people won't sit for longer rides. You couldn't build a World of Motion again like it is in Epcot. I argue that. I think that if you tell good stories, people will hang with you. They will. You could build a longer attraction. Yeah. Just tell better stories.
In fact, you could build a hotel where people are in the story for 40 hours and they don't get tired of it.
Ooh, how does that work? Do you think anyone would pay to build that? I wonder.
I don't know, 5 minutes to 40 hours. It's a big jump.
It's a jump, but look, how much time do people spend on Instagram, on their social media account? You do the analytics.
Yeah.
People have 24 hours in the day. Of that, you have X amount of hours in your leisure time. You can spend it on a ride, you can spend it on a movie, you can spend it on social media, but you will spend it somewhere. So I would argue, if you're spending an hour on social media, you have an attention span that we could apply to a ride. So to cheap out and say, I can't spend $100 million unless it's a 5-minute experience. What if you spend $100 million on a 20-minute experience? Same capital, same risk, but you're, capturing people, and again, guest satisfaction rises.
Absolutely. So, in summary, it's been 30 years now of Euro Disneyland Paris. Any final thoughts on the anniversary?
Well, again, for a park that had so many near-death experiences, I'm glad that you and I can have this conversation at all.
Yeah.
I am very grateful to having been part of it because, again, when I first got the call going over to Vacoma for Anaheim, who knew when I was playing bushes around the treehouse that I'd be doing so much? And it's not just Euro Disneyland First Gate. I came back to design, be creative director for Buzz Lightyear in First Gate. I did a lot of work on Second Gate through Ratatouille, Toy Story Land, Toon Studios, working on Marvel Avengers Campus, and other things. So I have a long history of over 30 years with Disneyland Paris. And the first day I got that first phone call, or the day that Tony came to my office, knocked at my door and said, "Do you have an hour to spend on ACP?" I couldn't have known then that I would have spent so much of my career working in and on projects for Euro Disneyland. But I'm glad I did.
Well, we're glad too. So we have to, at some point, we got to come back. I got to talk to you about Toontown. We're going to have to talk about those studios attractions. Maybe once they build up that park a bit and people like it more, we'll talk more about the studios.
You could, we could. And if, before that, if people are interested, you can find me on, Twitter at Jim Shull. I'm always there.
You're always tweeting fascinating pictures, not just of Paris either. You have amazing Disney World stuff and Disneyland and just stuff from everywhere. That's just fantastic.
Well, I've said before, I was a Disney fan before I was a Disney cast member. And so I'm also on a pack rack. I've got boxes, and I've got a lot of boxes. I've got too many. I have over 50,000 photographs and books and brochures. I never threw anything away. And I have a memory for the few things I did throw away, and I kick myself for doing that. But I was a Disney fan long before I was a Disney cast member, and I'm still a Disney fan. So love to share and do it as often as I can on Twitter.
And where can they find you?
Oh, they can find me on Twitter at Jim Shull. And if you write me, I can't promise I'll answer everything, but I make every effort to do so. And I'm always happy to hear from fans as passionate as I am. And there are no bad questions. Hey, fan, there are no odd or stupid questions.
Unless I ask them.
No, not even you, Tom. You don't even get into that. You don't even.
Unless it's about the Return to Oz segment of Storybook Land. And
someday in a generation far from now, in 30 years, somebody's going to have a sequel to Return to Oz, make $1 bazillion, and Euro Disneyland will be announcing Return to Oz, the ride. Stranger things happen.
Well, Jim, thank you so much. A pleasure as always.
Okay, take care, and thank you again, and take care, and we'll talk again.